Hello, my name is Mike Olson, and in this video I'm going to talk about my composition, Flute Clouds. Back in 2007, I was approached by the sculptor Joyce Crane. She makes these large site-specific sculpture installations, and she approached me about doing custom music for her unveiling of a big piece she was installing in a university in southern Utah that was going to have a dance performance component, which was being put together by the choreographer Susan Gingrasso. The sculpture consists of about 6,000 small acrylic squares that have a sort of prismatic quality. Light is reflecting and refracting through these things, and they're all like little strung together on little bits of monofilament, so they're free to rotate and move around, and they create these beautiful reflections. They're in the sort of a big two-story atrium area, and they reflect against this incredible convex wall, so it's curving like this, and there's glass that's interrupted by big glass windows and then stone surfaces, but it's this convex surface. So when the light is reflecting off of these little pieces of material, the reflections that it's creating actually are moving diagonally, which is really kind of a neat effect to see. The sculpture is called Atmosphere, and it is using as its point of reference a meteorological phenomena called virga. Now, the university is located in southern Utah, and it's very much of a desert sort of environment. And in that environment, they get a phenomena where there's rain systems that will move through, where the rain is falling out of the cloud, and you can see these wisps of precipitation falling off, but they evaporate before they even get to the ground, and it creates these incredible long wispy sort of shapes. And that was what she was using as her inspiration or point of reference for the sculpture that she created. I was very happy to be involved in this, and I spoke obviously at length with Joyce about the piece. I ended up creating something that, and I like limitations, so this one I wanted to give myself the limitations of just using flutes. It uses many different kinds of flutes. The person I worked with is the flautist Tom Kehoe. Well, I shouldn't say just a flautist. He's a multi-instrumentalist who plays all kinds of instruments, and including flutes. He's got the largest collection of flutes I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was sitting amongst some of the various instruments that I used on Mike's piece, Flute Clouds, and you can see their variety from Western bass flute and alto flute to this bamboo bass flute, and this there's no real specific name for it because it doesn't come out of a specific ethnic tradition, although it's like a lot of Japanese flutes. It's not an official shakuhachi, but it's an end-blown one rather than a side-blown flute. You can see these are, down here I have a combination of different both end-blown flutes and side-blown flutes. This one was used for some of the more subtle effects. It's at least 3 octaves and one of a kind, so it's a very unusual kind of overtones that it makes.
So it was great working with him. I recorded a bunch of fragments of him, gestures and so forth of him playing different sorts of things on these flutes. I should mention again, this is using my fragment composition method where I record many discrete elements and then I go and construct the piece later in the computer.
So these world music techniques and classical techniques and jazz techniques influenced what I was doing, but they didn't form the body of actually what I did. And what I did came out of, like I was saying, Mike's instructions of follow this graphic design, follow this impulse, try to do this here. And, you know, Mike's directions can be kind of Zen koan-ish, you know, in the sense that they're not literal and they might not have a literal solution, but they're implying a question and a response to a question that's stimulating a creative response that pushed me to go beyond what I would normally do and try to create sounds and moods that were specific to just what Mike was wanting, that
So the music is using basically only flutes, with the exception of a little bit of wind chime and a little bit of environmental sound. I used a little bit of rain, a little bit of wind, a little bit of thunder, just sort of the opening and ending, just little bookends there. And Joyce wanted this music to be part of the unveiling ceremony for the sculpture, and would also, of course, have this dance component that Susan Gingrasso did. And I traveled to southern Utah for the unveiling, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time with those guys. It became kind of a fun little trip for me, because I flew out to Salt Lake City, and then I drove down, did a loop down through, went to Bryce, and I went to Zion, and went to Monument Valley, and looped around and went up to Arches. But it was really nice. I hadn't seen some of those areas before, and it was really cool for me just to visit there. And it was so nice to work with Joyce and Carl Philibom and Susan Gingrasso, and they brought in a number of other people to help with the installation. It was really a nice time that we had there. And I think doing this little road trip before actually arriving at the site, in a way, kind of gave me a context, just a physical environment context for the piece. This is an environment that Joyce is real familiar with. She lives in Arizona, and all of her works are always linked somehow to the environment in which the piece is being installed. So it was nice for me to have that trip in advance, and then to come on the location and see that they've been working for days, installing this incredibly complex piece of work, and to actually physically be there in the room and see the effect, just the three-dimensional effect being there, to see how it was interacting with the space. Just beautiful, glorious. And again, my music being this fragment style where I construct in the computer, the finished work is not really reasonably performable live. So the whole plan was to just play a recording of the piece and have the choreography happen live underneath the giant sculpture. And I thought that worked out very nicely. I settled on the name Flute Clouds, obviously the reference to the virga and flutes, since it's all flutes. So it's flutes, and it's these clouds, flute clouds. I don't know that Joyce had really settled on the name Atmosphere quite at the point when I was writing the piece, but that may have affected how I thought about the title. But I liked the name Flute Clouds, and it just sort of stuck. And I'm glad that it's one of the projects included in the 6 projects recording on the Innova label. Ties in very nicely with the other pieces on that recording. And all through this video, now as you're watching, you're hearing some of the piece, Flute Clouds, in the background. If you want to hear the whole thing, you'd have to go out and buy the record or the CD, or just get the download to hear the full piece, which I encourage you to do. And again, this was just a real privilege for me to work with Joyce on this piece, and to travel to that part of the country and see that landscape and the sculpture in its final form in that space, in that part of the country, and to hear the music there and see the dance all in that environment. It was just a complete synergy of holistic experience of the whole thing. It's hard for me to put into words. I always have difficulty verbalizing some of these things. And of course, it's always a pleasure for me to work with my friend Tom Kehoe, who did all the incredible flute work on this piece. So there you go, Flute Clouds. Thanks for listening to me talk about it.